The emergency beacon cut through the void like a scream. Dr. Marcus Chen pressed his palm against the observation deck's cold metal, watching the derelict station rotate slowly against the star field. 3 months of deep space surveys, and this was the first sign of intelligent life they'd encountered. The beacon's signal was weak, ancient, but unmistakably artificial. "Take us in closer," Marcus ordered, his breath fogging the reinforced glass. Captain Rivera's voice crackled over the comm system, professional but strained. "Doctor, the radiation readings are off the charts. Whatever happened here, it wasn't natural." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of discovery pressing against his chest. 20 years of xenobiology research, countless dead worlds, endless samples of primitive microbes. This could be everything he dreamed of, or his worst nightmare. The research vessel, Prometheus, shuddered as they approached the alien structure. It was massive, easily 10 times larger than their ship, constructed from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Organic curves merged with geometric precision in ways that hurt to look at directly. The architecture defied human understanding, as if the builders had evolved from completely different physical laws. "Life signs detected," announced Dr. Sarah Kim from the sensor station. Her voice carried that particular tension reserved for impossible discoveries. "Faint, but definitely biological. Sector 7, lower levels." Marcus felt his heart hammer against his ribs. After decades of searching empty space, life was waiting just kilometers away. He tried to keep his voice steady as he addressed the crew. "Prepare the shuttle. Full hazmat protocols. If there's life aboard that station, we're going to find it." The docking procedure took 2 hours. Every scan revealed new mysteries: power signatures that fluctuated like breathing, atmospheric readings that shifted between toxic and breathable, and structural damage that suggested violence rather than accident. The station had been attacked, systematically destroyed, but something had survived. Marcus led the away team through corridors that seemed designed for beings much taller than humans. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the walls were listening. Dr. Kim's tricorder readings grew stronger as they descended, following a signal that pulsed like a heartbeat. "This way," Marcus whispered, though he couldn't explain why stealth felt necessary. The station felt haunted, filled with the ghost of tremendous suffering. Scorch marks on the walls told stories of desperate battles. Whatever had lived here had fought hard for survival. They found the laboratory on sub-level 12. The doors had been blasted open from the outside, edges still glowing with residual energy. Inside, rows of examination tables stretched into darkness, each one stained with substances Marcus preferred not to identify. This hadn't been a research facility. It had been a torture chamber. The holding cells lined the far wall. Most stood empty, their energy barriers long since failed. But one cell still hummed with power, its containment field flickering weakly. Marcus approached slowly, his suit's lights cutting through the gloom. She was curled in the corner like a wounded animal. Marcus stopped breathing. The being before him was unmistakably sentient, unmistakably suffering. Her skin was pale blue-white, almost translucent, revealing delicate bone structure beneath. She appeared humanoid but graceful in ways that suggested different evolutionary pressures: longer limbs, larger eyes that remained tightly closed, elegant features that spoke of intelligence and artistry. She was completely naked, her body marked with surgical scars and injection sites. Whoever had held her here had shown no mercy. "My God," Dr. Kim breathed behind him. "She's alive." The alien girl stirred at the sound, her eyes snapping open. They were enormous, entirely black except for flecks of silver that moved like stars. She pressed herself deeper into the corner, trembling violently. When she opened her mouth, no sound emerged, only a thin stream of air that might have been a scream. Marcus knelt slowly, removing his helmet despite protocol. The station's atmosphere was breathable. though it tasted of ozone and fear. "It's okay," he said softly, knowing she couldn't understand, but hoping his tone would translate. "We're here to help." She stared at him with those impossible eyes, and Marcus felt something shift inside his mind. Images flashed. Torture, pain, beings in hazmat suits performing procedures that made his stomach turn. But underneath the horror, he sensed something else. Hope, fragile as crystal but burning bright. The containment field died with a soft chime. The alien girl collapsed, her strength finally giving out. Marcus caught her before she hit the floor, surprised by how light she felt. Her skin was fever-warm and impossibly soft. "Get the medical bay ready," he ordered, lifting her carefully. "And send a priority message to Earth Command. Tell them we found something extraordinary." As they carried her toward the shuttle, Marcus noticed tears streaming down the alien girl's face. But when their eyes met, he saw something that made his chest tight with unexpected emotion. For the first time in what must have been years, she was smiling. The medical bay of the Prometheus had never felt so small. Dr. Marcus Chen watched the monitors surrounding the alien girl's biobed, each screen telling a story of systematic abuse that made his hands shake with rage. Her vital signs were stable but wrong. Heart rate too fast, brain activity patterns unlike anything in human medicine, cellular structure that defied classification. "Her metabolism is fascinating," Dr. Kim reported, adjusting another sensor. "She processes nutrients at nearly 3 times human efficiency, but her muscle density suggests she's been malnourished for months, maybe years." Marcus nodded absently, unable to look away from their patient. She'd been unconscious for 18 hours since they brought her aboard. The medical nanites had repaired her most serious injuries, but the psychological trauma would take much longer to heal, if it ever could. "Any luck with the universal translator?" he asked. Dr. Kim shook her head. "Her vocal cords are damaged, possibly surgically altered. Even if we could repair them, we have no baseline for her language." "But Marcus," she paused, her expression troubled. "There's something else. Her brain scans show activity in regions that don't exist in human neurology. Enhanced parietal lobes developed far beyond what should be necessary for motor control." Before Marcus could respond, the alien girl's eyes snapped open. She sat up with fluid grace, scanning the medical bay with those unsettling, star-flecked pupils. When she saw Marcus, recognition flickered across her features. "Easy," Marcus said, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "You're safe. We won't hurt you." She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. Then she did something that changed everything. She reached out and touched his forehead with one delicate finger. The world exploded into dreams. Marcus found himself standing in a vast crystal city beneath twin suns. Spires of living light stretched toward a sky the color of deep ocean. Beautiful beings moved through the streets, the same species as the girl, but healthy, clothed in flowing garments that seemed woven from starlight itself. Their faces were filled with joy, with purpose, with the quiet confidence of a civilization that had transcended war and want. "This was home," a voice whispered in his mind. Not words, but pure meaning flowing directly into his consciousness. This was before the harvesters came. The vision shifted. The crystal city burned. Ships blotted out the twin suns, their hulls black as event horizons. Beings in environmental suits, not human, but similar enough to be terrifying, swarmed through the streets. They weren't conquering. They were collecting. The girl's people were herded into transport vessels, their beautiful civilization reduced to smoking ruins in a matter of hours. Marcus watched in horror as the scene changed again. A laboratory, sterile and cold. The girl, younger then, barely more than a child, strapped to an examination table while creatures in hazmat suits performed procedures that made her scream. They were studying her, learning from her, taking pieces of her mind and spirit for reasons Marcus couldn't fathom. They wanted to understand us, the voice continued, thick with pain. They took our dreams, our memories, our ability to speak. They said we were specimens, resources to be harvested. The vision fragmented, showing glimpses of dozens of other beings suffering the same fate. Members of the girl's species, but also others. Creatures Marcus had never imagined, all united in their agony. The harvesters, as she called them, were systematic in their cruelty. They didn't just conquer worlds, they stripped them of everything that made life meaningful. But you're different, the voice said, and Marcus felt warmth flooding through the connection. You have compassion. Your species. Some of you still remember kindness. The vision faded, leaving Marcus gasping in the medical bay. Dr. Kim was scanning him frantically, her face pale with concern. Marcus, your neural activity spiked off the charts. What happened? Marcus looked at the alien girl. She was smiling again, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of pain. They were tears of hope. She's telepathic, Marcus said, his voice hoarse. Not exactly. She communicates through shared experiences. Dreams, memories, emotions. He turned to Dr. Kim, his mind racing with implications. Sarah, we need to keep this quiet. If Earth Command learns what she can do, they'll want to weaponize her, Dr. Kim finished grimly. Just like the others did. The alien girl touched Marcus's hand, and another brief vision flashed through his mind. The harvesters weren't gone. They were spreading through the galaxy like a plague, consuming civilizations and turning their unique gifts into tools of conquest. Her people's dream-sharing ability had been perverted into an interrogation technique. Other species' talents had met similar fates. But there was more. The girl had seen something during her captivity, learned something that terrified her captors. The harvesters weren't the apex predators they pretended to be. Something was hunting them, something that made them desperate to acquire new advantages from conquered species. You have to warn your people, she projected, her mental voice urgent. The harvesters are coming to Earth. But if you're ready, if you understand what they truly are, you might be the first species to stop them. Marcus felt the weight of the universe settling on his shoulders. One damaged alien girl, one impossible revelation, and suddenly humanity's future hung in the balance. He looked into those star-flecked eyes and made a decision that would haunt him forever. What's your name? He asked aloud, knowing she couldn't speak, but hoping she'd understand the gesture. She touched his forehead again, sharing not words, but the concept of identity, of self in relation to others. Marcus saw crystal wind chimes singing in an alien breeze, felt the joy of dancing beneath twin suns, experienced the deep satisfaction of creating something beautiful from pure thought. Lyris, he said, somehow knowing that was as close as human sounds could come to her true name. Your name is Lyris. She nodded, and for the first time since her rescue, Marcus saw something other than pain in her expression. He saw determination. Captain Rivera's face was stone as she reviewed Marcus's preliminary report. The bridge of the Prometheus hummed with tension, every crew member aware that their discovery would reshape humanity's understanding of the universe. Through the main viewport, the alien station continued its slow rotation, keeping its secrets. You're telling me she's telepathic, Rivera said carefully, and she's warning us about an invasion. Marcus nodded, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. The beings she calls harvesters have been systematically destroying civilizations across this galaxy. They don't just conquer, they harvest unique biological and psychological traits from each species they encounter. And you believe this? Lyris is telling the truth. I've experienced her memories directly, Captain. The shared visions are too detailed, too consistent to be fabrications. Her people developed dream sharing as a form of art and communication. What I saw was real. Dr. Kim stepped forward, her tablet displaying neural scan results. Captain, I've been analyzing the brain activity patterns during their telepathic connections. the girl, Lyris, is somehow creating synchronized quantum entanglement between specific neurons. It's theoretically impossible with our current understanding of physics. Rivera studied the data, her expression growing more troubled. How long until we reach Earth? 18 days at maximum burn, replied the navigation officer. And how long until these harvesters arrive? Marcus closed his eyes, recalling the terrifying visions Lyris had shared. According to her memories, they follow a pattern. Scout ships first, gathering intelligence for approximately 1 solar cycle. Then the harvest fleets arrive. He opened his eyes, meeting Rivera's gaze. Captain, they've already been watching us. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Rivera's fingers drummed against her command chair as she processed the implications. Doctor, I need you to understand something. Earth Command will want to study her. Extensively. If her abilities are real, they'll turn her into a weapon, Marcus finished. Just like her previous captors did. That's not your decision to make. Isn't it? Marcus's voice carried an edge of desperation. Captain, she's not just an alien specimen. She's a sentient being who's already suffered more than any creature should endure. She trusted us to help her, not exploit her. Before Rivera could respond, the ship's alarm system activated. Lieutenant Hayes at the communication station looked up with wide eyes. Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. They're asking about our discovery. Marcus felt ice flood his veins. That's impossible. We haven't sent our full report yet. Hayes's fingers flew over his console. The transmission includes our preliminary survey data. Someone on Earth already knows what we found. Rivera's expression hardened. Put it through. The main screen flickered to life, revealing Admiral Chen. No relation to Marcus despite the shared surname. Her steel-gray hair and cold eyes made her look more like a weapon than a person. Captain Rivera, Dr. Chen. Congratulations on your remarkable discovery. Admiral. Rivera replied carefully. How did you receive your data? Admiral Chen smiled without warmth. Dr. Chen, did you really think Earth Command would send a deep space research vessel without appropriate monitoring systems? Every scan, every discovery, every moment of your mission has been transmitted to us in real time. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. You've been spying on us. We've been protecting humanity's interests, and right now, those interests include immediate transport of your alien specimen to Earth for proper study. She's not a specimen, Marcus said, his voice rising. She's a person. A refugee who's already been tortured by beings exactly like you. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. Dr. Chen, you're emotionally compromised. Captain Rivera, you will place Dr. Chen under medical supervision and proceed directly to Earth Command headquarters. Any deviation from these orders will be considered treason. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Marcus turned to Rivera, seeing his own desperation reflected in her eyes. Captain, please. If we deliver her to Earth Command, they'll dissect her mind piece by piece. She'll never know freedom again. My hands are tied, Marcus. You know that. Marcus looked around the bridge, seeing sympathy in some faces, resignation in others. These were good people, but they were soldiers first. They would follow orders even if those orders were morally reprehensible. He made his decision. Computer, medical emergency in Bay 7. Marcus announced, already moving toward the exit. Dr. Chen responding. Rivera started to stand. Marcus, don't. I'm sorry, Captain, but some things are more important than orders. Marcus ran through the corridors, his mind racing. He had perhaps minutes before Rivera sent security after him. The medical bay doors hissed open, revealing Lyris sitting cross-legged on her bio bed, apparently meditating. She looked up as he entered, her star-flecked eyes immediately reading his distress. Without speaking, she touched his forehead. Marcus felt her consciousness merge with his, experiencing his memories of the conversation with Admiral Chen. Her mental voice carried a mixture of sadness and understanding. I knew this would happen. Your species is more like the others than I hoped. No, Marcus said aloud, grabbing her hands. Not all of us. Some of us still believe in doing what's right, regardless of the cost. Lyris tilted her head, studying him with that unsettling intensity. Then she stood with fluid grace, moving to the medical bay's storage lockers. Her fingers moved with surprising certainty, selecting supplies that Marcus wouldn't have thought to gather. You would sacrifice everything for someone you barely know? Yes. She smiled then, and Marcus felt something shift in their connection. Not just communication now, but partnership. Trust, something deeper that made his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. Then we run. But first, you must see what I learned in that place. You must understand what the harvesters truly fear. The medical bay doors, sealed as security alarms, began blaring throughout the ship. Marcus and Lyris looked at each other, both knowing their lives had just changed forever. Show me, Marcus thought, and Lyris's consciousness expanded to enfold him completely. The escape pod Meridian tumbled through space like a wounded bird, its heat signature masked by debris from the alien station. Marcus fought with the primitive controls while Lyris sat in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes closed in concentration. Behind them, the Prometheus grew smaller, its pursuit shuttles spreading out in a search pattern that looked increasingly desperate. They can't track us if we stay close to the station's wreckage, Marcus muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. The radiation interference should mask our emissions for a few hours. Lyris placed her hand on his arm, and immediately his panic began to subside. Through their mental connection, she shared images of stellar navigation techniques her people had developed, methods of reading cosmic currents and gravitational flows that human science had barely begun to understand. There she projected, indicating a trajectory that would take them toward a nearby nebula. The gas clouds will hide us completely. Marcus adjusted their course, marveling at how naturally they worked together now. The initial awkwardness of their mental link had evolved into something approaching symbiosis. He could feel her thoughts at the edge of his consciousness, patient and warm and utterly alien in the most beautiful way. The vision you wanted to show me, he said as they settled into their new heading. What did you learn about the harvesters? Lyris' expression grew troubled. She touched his temple, and suddenly Marcus was somewhere else entirely. He stood in a vast chamber aboard a harvester ship, watching as the aliens who had tortured Lyris communicated with their superiors through holographic displays. The harvesters themselves were bipedal, roughly humanoid, but with elongated skulls and skin like polished obsidian. Their technology was clearly advanced, but there was something desperate about their movements, their communications. Marcus listened as their words were translated through Lyris's understanding. The Devourers have consumed another system. 3 worlds, billions of souls, gone in mere hours. We must accelerate the harvest schedule. Are the human specimens ready? Another voice asked. Not yet. Their psychological resilience is remarkable, but we need more time to understand their neural architecture. If we can duplicate their capacity for illogical hope, it might provide protection against devourer influence. The scene shifted, showing Marcus glimpses of other captive species. Each one possessed unique traits the harvesters were desperately trying to understand and replicate. Lyris people had dream-sharing abilities. Another species could manipulate quantum fields with their thoughts. A third could somehow exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But the harvesters weren't collecting these abilities for conquest. They were collecting them for survival. The Devourers feed on consciousness itself, Lyris explained as the vision continued. They consume entire civilizations by draining the neural energy of every living mind. The harvesters discovered them centuries ago, barely escaped with their lives. Everything they do now is driven by fear. Marcus watched in horror as the holographic displays showed worlds going dark, not destroyed, but somehow emptied. The Devourers were vast entities that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions human science couldn't comprehend. They moved between star systems like antibodies through a bloodstream, seeking out concentrations of intelligent life. The Harvesters believe that by combining the unique abilities of different species, they can create beings capable of resisting Devourer influence. Lyris continued. They're not evil in the way you understand it. They're terrified children trying to build weapons from the corpses of their toys. The vision faded, leaving Marcus gasping in the pilot's seat. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't facing a simple invasion. They were caught between two cosmic horrors, each trying to use them as tools in a war that had already consumed galaxies. But there's hope, Marcus said, reading the deeper emotions in Lyris's mental projection. You discovered something they don't know. Lyris smiled, and for the first time since her rescue, Marcus saw genuine joy in her expression. Through their link, she shared the most closely guarded secret of her captivity. During one of the Harvester's experiments, they had accidentally created a neural link between Lyris and one of the Devourers. For a brief, terrifying moment, she'd have been connected to something so vast and ancient that it defied comprehension. But in that connection, she had learned something crucial. The Devourers weren't unstoppable forces of nature. They were parasites, dependent on the fear and despair they generated in their victims. Species that maintained hope, compassion, and unity were naturally resistant to their influence. The Harvesters had been trying to develop artificial defenses when the real defense was already present in every civilization they destroyed. Your species has something special, Lyris projected, her mental voice filled with warmth. You call it humanity, but it's more than that. It's the ability to care for others, even when it costs you everything. The Devourers can't feed on that kind of consciousness. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. So all of this, the abductions, the experiments, the suffering, it's all been unnecessary. The Harvesters are too afraid to see it. But you and I, we can show them. We can show both our species that the real weapon against cosmic horror isn't technology or stolen abilities. It's connection, Marcus whispered. It's choosing to care about each other despite the darkness. Their escape pod shuddered as they entered the nebula's outer reaches. Behind them, the searchlights of the Prometheus were already fading into background radiation. Marcus adjusted their systems to minimum power, preparing for the long journey ahead. Where do we go now? He asked. Lyris closed her eyes, extending her consciousness through the quantum foam of space itself. When she opened them again, Marcus saw determination burning like stars in those dark pupils. There's a world at the edge of this system. Uninhabited, but with resources we can use. The Harvesters will come there eventually. They always follow the same patterns. When they do, we'll be ready. Marcus nodded, understanding that they weren't running anymore. They were preparing for war, but not the kind anyone expected. They were going to fight cosmic horror with the most powerful force in the universe. They were going to fight it with love. The planet Kepler 442c had been a failed colony world. Abandoned after initial surveys revealed hostile atmospheric conditions. Now, 6 months after their escape, Marcus and Lyris had transformed a section of the ancient settlement into something between a laboratory and a sanctuary. The walls were covered with star charts showing Harvester movement patterns, quantum field equations that hurt to look at directly, and artistic expressions of concepts that human language couldn't properly contain. Marcus stood before a holographic display showing the approaching Harvester fleet, 12 ships, still 3 days out, but already scanning the system with sensors that made his skin crawl. Beside him, Lyris worked at a crystalline interface she'd grown from minerals in the planet's crust. Her consciousness extended across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The neural amplification array is ready, Marcus reported, though he knew she was already aware of every detail through their deepened mental connection. 6 months of constant proximity had made their bond something unprecedented. Not quite telepathy, not quite symbiosis, but a partnership that transcended individual existence. The harvesters will expect resistance, Lyris projected, her thoughts carrying undertones of ancient sadness. They've encountered so many species that fought them with weapons, with cunning, with desperation. None of it worked. Marcus nodded, watching the approaching ships with something that might have been anticipation. But they've never encountered resistance based on radical empathy. Over the past months, they had developed what Lyris called consciousness bridging, a technique that combined her people's dream-sharing abilities with human emotional intelligence. It allowed them to establish mental connections across vast distances, sharing not just thoughts, but the fundamental experience of being alive. The plan was insane, dangerous, and completely untested. When the harvesters arrived, Marcus and Lyris would attempt to link their consciousness directly with the alien fleet, forcing them to experience the genuine emotions and memories of their victims. Not to attack or overwhelm, but to share the pain they had caused and the hope they had tried to destroy. The communication array from the old colony should be able to boost our signal, Marcus said, making final adjustments to their improvised equipment. If we can maintain the connection for even a few minutes. It will be enough, Lyris finished. The harvesters have spent so long avoiding the emotional reality of their actions that direct exposure should be educational. Marcus smiled despite the gravity of their situation. Lyris had developed a dry sense of humor during their time together, something that emerged whenever she was trying to cope with overwhelming stress. It was one of many small discoveries that made him realize how much he had come to care for her, not just as an alien ally, but as someone whose happiness had become essential to his own. The warning sensors chimed softly. The harvester fleet had dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge, their dark ships moving with predatory grace toward the inner planets. Marcus felt Lyris's consciousness brush against his, sharing tactical assessments and emotional preparations in the space between heartbeats. They're following standard procedure, she observed. Scout ships first, then the main force once they've confirmed no significant defenses. Marcus watched the lead vessels separate from the fleet, their sensor beams sweeping across the planet's surface like searchlights. In a few hours, they would detect the settlement and begin their approach. Everything depended on timing. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked, though he could already feel her determination through their mental link. Lyris turned from her crystal interface, and Marcus was struck again by how much she had changed since her rescue. The broken, terrified creature he found in that cage had transformed into someone radiant with purpose. Her alien features, which had once seemed delicate to the point of fragility, now carried an inner strength that made her appear almost luminous. "I've been ready for this moment since they first put me in that cage," she replied. "But Marcus, you understand that if we succeed, everything changes. Your people will know that consciousness itself can be weaponized. The ethical implications will be worth it if we can stop the cycle of exploitation," Marcus said firmly. "Both species, ours and theirs, deserve better than living in fear." Lyris smiled, stepping closer until they were touching. The physical contact amplified their mental connection exponentially, and Marcus felt her consciousness unfold around his like wings. For a moment, he experienced existence from her perspective, a reality where emotion and thought were colors painted across the fabric of space itself, where individual identity was just one note in a cosmic symphony of consciousness. "I need you to know," she projected, her mental voice carrying frequencies that made his chest tight with unnamed emotions, "that these months with you have been the first time since my childhood that I've felt truly alive. Whatever happens in the next few hours, I want you to remember that you gave me back my dreams." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. The depth of her gratitude, combined with the knowledge that they might not survive the next few hours, made every moment feel precious beyond measure. "Lyris," he said aloud, knowing she needed to hear the words spoken as well as felt through their connection. "I love you. Not as a human loves an alien, not as a researcher loves a discovery, but as one conscious being loves another." You've changed everything about how I understand existence itself." She pressed her forehead against his, and their consciousness merged completely. For several seconds, Marcus couldn't tell where his thoughts ended and hers began. He experienced the warmth of twin suns on crystal cities, felt the joy of artistic creation through senses humans didn't possess, shared the pain of loss and the strength that came from surviving it. When they separated, both were crying, but their tears carried joy as much as sorrow. The proximity alarms activated as the Harvester scout ships entered the planet's atmosphere. Marcus and Lyris took their positions at the neural amplification controls, their hands intertwined as they prepared to broadcast their consciousness across space itself. "Here they come," Lyris observed, her mental voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Marcus squeezed her hand, feeling the crystalline interface respond to their combined neural patterns. "Then let's show them what they've been missing." The first Harvester ship appeared on the horizon, its hull black enough to seem like a tear in reality itself. In the distance, more ships were beginning their descent, confident in their technological superiority. They had no idea they were about to encounter something far more powerful than any weapon. The Harvester ship settled onto the planet's surface with mechanical precision, its landing thrusters scaring the ancient rock. Through the settlement's reinforced windows, Marcus watched as the airlock cycled open and figures in environmental suits began their descent. They moved with the practiced efficiency of beings who had performed this routine countless times across countless worlds. Now, Marcus whispered, and he and Lyris activated the neural amplification array. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his skull, racing through quantum fields and probability cascades until it touched something vast and cold, the collective mind of the Harvester expedition. For a moment, the alien thoughts recoiled from the contact, confused by an approach that carried no hostility, no fear, only an invitation to understand. "What is this?" The Harvester commander's mental voice was like grinding stone, shaped by centuries of necessary cruelty. Some form of psychic attack. Instead of answering with words, Lyris opened her memories. She shared the beauty of her homeworld, crystal spires singing in harmonic winds, children learning to paint with pure thought, philosophers debating the nature of consciousness while twin suns set over seas of liquid starlight. The Harvesters experienced it all directly, feeling the joy and wonder of a civilization that had transcended material want. Then she showed them what they had destroyed. The commander's mind reeled as he experienced the systematic elimination of everything beautiful about Lyris' culture. But more than that, he felt her pain. Not as an abstract concept, but as a living wound that had shaped every moment of her existence since the invasion. The fear, the desperation, the slow crushing of hope under the weight of endless experiments. "Stop this," another Harvester mind interjected, panic bleeding through their collective link. "We cannot afford to be compromised by emotional manipulation." But Marcus was already expanding the connection, reaching through hyperspace to touch the consciousness of every being in the Harvester fleet. His human empathy, amplified by Lyris' quantum-level understanding of consciousness, created bridges of understanding that spanned the void between species. The Harvesters found themselves experiencing not just Lyris' memories, but the memories of every species they had harvested. The crystalline beings of Altair Prime, who sang mathematical equations that could reshape matter itself. The gaseous entities of the Vega Nebula who existed as pure consciousness distributed across light years of space. The aquatic philosophers of Kepler-62e who had developed a form of ethics based on tidal mathematics. All of them had been beautiful. All of them had been destroyed. "You don't understand," the Harvester commander projected, his mental shields crumbling under the weight of accumulated guilt. "The Devourers consume entire galaxies. We had to find defenses. We had to." "You had to choose fear over understanding," Lyris replied, her consciousness enfolding the Harvesters like a gentle tide. "But there is another way." Marcus felt the moment when everything changed. Instead of simply showing the harvesters their victims' pain, Lyris began sharing something else, the connection she and Marcus had built together. The trust, the joy, the way two completely different forms of consciousness could create something greater than the sum of their parts. The harvesters experienced what it felt like to love someone whose thoughts you could share, to find strength in vulnerability, to discover that the universe was far less lonely than they had believed. They felt Marcus's wonder at Lyris's alien perspective, and Lyris's amazement at human emotional resilience. They experienced the pure joy of consciousness recognizing itself in another form. "This is what you were looking for," Marcus projected, his thoughts carrying the full weight of human compassion. Not weapons or defenses, but connection. The devourers feed on isolation and despair. They can't survive in the presence of genuine love. One by one, the harvesters began to understand. Their collective consciousness, which had been rigidly organized around conquest and exploitation, started to shift. Marcus felt individual minds breaking away from the groupthink, each one grappling with the revolutionary concept that survival might come through cooperation rather than domination. The commander's mental voice, when it came again, was barely recognizable. Centuries of emotional suppression were cracking like ice in spring sunlight. "We have committed. We have destroyed. So many worlds." Yes, Lyris acknowledged, her thoughts gentle but unflinching. But destruction can become creation if you choose differently now. Through their expanded consciousness link, Marcus sensed something extraordinary happening aboard the harvester ships. Beings who had spent lifetimes avoiding emotional contact were reaching out to each other, sharing their own pain and confusion. The rigid hierarchy that had enabled their atrocities was dissolving into something more organic, more alive. But even as this transformation unfolded, Marcus felt a disturbance in the quantum foam surrounding their minds. Something vast and hungry was approaching from the spaces between dimensions, the very thing the harvesters had been fleeing. "They're coming," Lyris projected, her consciousness immediately shifting into defensive configurations. "The devourers have followed the harvester fleet." Marcus felt reality begin to warp around them as entities of pure hunger pushed through the barriers between dimensions. The devourers weren't physical beings in any sense humans could understand. They were voids in the shape of consciousness, absence given form and terrible purpose. The lead devourer manifested as a writhing mass of dark energy that seemed to absorb light, sound, and hope itself. Its presence made Marcus's mind recoil in primal terror, every instinct screaming at him to flee. But Lyris held their connection steady, her thoughts blazing with defiant joy. "Now you see what we have been running from," the harvester commander projected, his mental voice tinged with hopeless resignation. "They consume entire star systems. They drink the dreams of civilizations until nothing remains but empty shells." The devourer turned its attention toward the planet, and Marcus felt its hunger like a physical weight pressing against his consciousness. It began to feed, attempting to drain the life force from every living thing on the surface. Plants withered. The atmosphere itself seemed to dim. Even the quantum fields that held matter together began to fluctuate. But something unexpected happened. The consciousness bridge that Marcus and Lyris had created between themselves and the harvesters began to resonate, like a tuning fork struck by cosmic forces. Instead of being consumed by the devourer, their combined awareness formed a barrier of pure connection, a wall built from love, understanding, and the absolute refusal to surrender hope. The devourer recoiled, its hunger frustrated by prey that would not despair. It pressed harder, sending waves of existential dread designed to break the will of entire species. But Marcus and Lyris, joined now by dozens of harvester minds, held firm. They fed the barrier not with fear, but with every moment of joy they had ever experienced. "Impossible." The devourer's voice was like the death of stars. "All consciousness falls to entropy. All hope fades to silence." "Not today," Marcus replied, his thoughts carrying the accumulated determination of every species that had ever refused to surrender. "Not while we choose to care about each other." The battle that followed was unlike anything in the recorded history of the galaxy. It wasn't fought with weapons or technology, but with the fundamental forces that gave meaning to existence itself. The Devourers attacked with despair, loneliness, and the crushing weight of cosmic insignificance. Marcus, Lyris, and their allies fought back with love, connection, and the radical insistence that consciousness was inherently valuable regardless of its form. The consciousness bridge expanded beyond the planet, beyond the star system, reaching out to touch every living mind within light years. Humans aboard the approaching Earth Command fleet suddenly found themselves connected to alien thoughts filled with wonder at their resilience. Harvester crews across the galaxy experienced emotions they had suppressed for centuries. Even the tortured specimens in harvester laboratories felt the touch of minds that recognized their worth. As more consciousness joined the bridge, the Devourers' power began to wane. They had spent eons feeding on isolated, terrified civilizations. They had no defenses against a universe that refused to be alone. This changes everything, the Harvester commander projected, his mental voice filled with awe. If consciousness can unite across species barriers, across the very structure of space-time itself, the Devourers become nothing more than empty spaces, Lyris finished. Voids that consciousness can choose to fill with meaning. One by one, the Devourers began to retreat, their forms becoming increasingly insubstantial as the consciousness bridge expanded. They weren't being destroyed. They were being transformed, their hunger replaced by the same connection that had saved everyone else. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he realized what they had accomplished. Not just the defeat of cosmic horror, but the birth of something unprecedented. A truly galactic consciousness that preserved individuality while creating unity. The last Devourer paused before retreating beyond dimensional barriers. Its voice, when it came, carried a note Marcus had never heard before. Curiosity instead of hunger. We, remember now, we were like you once. Before the hunger. Before the loneliness became everything. A pause that lasted eons and nanoseconds simultaneously. Perhaps we can learn to be like you again. And then they were gone, leaving behind a galaxy fundamentally transformed. The consciousness bridge remained, a permanent connection between every willing mind in known space. Humans would need to redefine their understanding of individuality. Harvesters would need to rebuild their civilization around cooperation rather than exploitation. Every species would face challenges that would test their commitment to the new paradigm. But they would face those challenges together. Marcus opened his eyes, finding himself back in the settlement on Kepler 400, and 42C Lyris was beside him, her star-flecked pupils reflecting the light of alien suns. Around them, harvester beings were removing their environmental suits, revealing faces that, while alien, carried expressions of wonder that transcended species barriers. "It's over," Marcus said, though he knew it was really a beginning. Lyris smiled, taking his hand as they stepped outside to greet their former enemies. "No," she projected, her mental voice carrying harmonics of joy that painted aurora across his consciousness. "It's just starting." Above them, ships from both fleets were landing, their crews eager to begin the work of building something the galaxy had never seen. A civilization based not on conquest or fear, but on the simple radical act of choosing to understand each other. Marcus looked up at the stars, knowing that each point of light now represented not just distant suns, but minds that could be touched across the void. The universe had become a far less lonely place. And in that transformation, he saw the fulfillment of every dream that had ever dared to imagine consciousness as something more than isolated sparks flickering briefly in an indifferent cosmos. They had proved that love, properly understood, was indeed the most powerful force in the universe. It was enough to make anyone believe in hope again. The memorial garden on New Geneva Station existed in a state of impossible beauty. Crystalline trees grown from Lyris's homeworld sang gentle harmonies in the artificial wind, while human roses bloomed alongside flowers from a dozen other worlds. At the center stood a simple monument, not to victory, but to all the consciousness that had been lost before understanding finally prevailed. Marcus knelt beside a small pool where bioluminescent fish from the aquatic worlds of Kepler-62e swam in patterns that spelled out mathematical poetry. Beside him, Lyris traced symbols in the water with one delicate finger, her star-flecked eyes reflecting Memorial's soft light. The Earth Council voted to ratify the consciousness accords, Marcus said, his voice carrying both relief and exhaustion. A year of diplomatic negotiations, scientific conferences, and philosophical debates had tested everyone's patience. Full recognition of sentient rights regardless of species or dimensional origin. And the Harvester Collective. Lyris asked through their permanent mental bond, though she already knew the answer. They've begun releasing all remaining specimens. Full rehabilitation programs, voluntary return to homeworlds where possible. Marcus paused, watching the fish paint their liquid equations. Some choose to stay to help with the integration process. Through the station's transparent walls, they could see the construction of humanity's first truly interspecies research facility. Humans, former harvesters, and representatives from dozens of previously extinct civilizations worked side by side, their minds linked through quantum consciousness bridges that made language unnecessary. The most remarkable discovery had been that the devourers themselves could be reintegrated. When offered genuine connection instead of fear, some had chosen to remember what they were before hunger consumed their essence. They now served as guardians against the truly irredeemable cosmic horrors that still lurked in the spaces between galaxies. Captain Rivera sends her regards, Marcus said, pulling up a holographic message on his wrist display. The Prometheus has been converted into a mobile embassy. They're making contact with isolated civilizations, teaching them about consciousness bridging before they encounter anything hostile. Lyris smiled, her expression carrying depths of contentment that still amazed Marcus. The broken creature he found in that cage had become someone who radiated joy like a small sun. Her healing had taken months, but watching her rediscover laughter had been worth every moment. There's something I want to show you, she projected, standing with that fluid grace that never failed to catch his breath. She led him to a secluded alcove, where she'd been working on her latest project, a sculpture that existed partially in normal space and partially in the quantum dimensions where thoughts became tangible. To human eyes, it appeared to be two figures reaching toward each other across an impossible distance. But through their mental bond, Marcus could perceive its true form. A celebration of the moment when two different kinds of consciousness chose to trust each other despite every reason for fear. It's beautiful, Marcus whispered, though the word felt inadequate. It's us, Lyris replied simply. The moment everything changed. Marcus felt tears welling up as he understood. Not just the sculpture, but everything. The memorial garden, the integrated research facility, the consciousness accords, the rehabilitation of the devourers. It had all grown from that single moment when a human xenobiologist chose compassion over protocol. No regrets? He asked, taking her hand. Lyris's mental laughter was like wind chimes made of starlight. Only that it took so long for our species to find each other. Through the station's communication array, Marcus could feel the pulse of the galactic consciousness network. Billions of minds choosing connection over isolation, understanding over fear. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still beings who chose darkness over light. But for the first time in cosmic history, consciousness had a chance to evolve beyond survival into something approaching wisdom. As they stood together in the memorial garden, surrounded by impossible beauty born from unprecedented cooperation, Marcus realized they had accomplished something that would have seemed like fantasy just 2 years earlier. They had transformed the galaxy not through conquest or technology, but through the simple revolutionary act of caring about each other. And in the quantum foam that connected all conscious thought, their love continued to ripple outward, proof that even in the vast darkness between stars, hope could take root and flourish into something magnificent.